I love that film. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. It's an important film in the history of New York, but it's a really important film for New York today, and that's really what I want to try and understand is some of the things that you learned in making the film and looking at where we are now. Does New York today remind you of of any of um, the historical periods that you track in the film?
Well, yes, that I feel that New York is in a stage of crisis again, probably equally as desperate in some ways. And I feel that just as the creators of Manhattan Plaza realized that within crisis is opportunity. And so we have a real opportunity to think about the kind of city we want to live in, the kind of people that we want to have in New York, and we have a chance to participate in creating that by envisioning it.
So where now that you've studied this, you understand how artists can seed a life and growth and magic in communities and miracles. Where would the next miracle be? Where would we be looking to for a miracle? Like where would the next Manhattan Plaza be in terms of New York today if we were looking for another miracle?
Well, I think that there are underutilized spaces. There are spaces that are no longer as appealing. I think there's been a lot of luxury housing built, and maybe that market is not going to come back to New York in the same way. I think many people have found ways of telecommuting or using their jobs part-time that they may need to be present. I think there's going to be a real shift. I think we've also seen this, for example, in the Bay Area in San Francisco, that there was just a big article in the New York Times about, it says they can't leave San Francisco fast enough. And I actually think this is tremendously healthy because it leaves, as rents drop, it gives opportunity for people like artists to return.
So you think that there will be a renaissance in New York and the artists can lead it?
I hope so, yes. I think the artists can lead it with real will on the part of philanthropy, real will on the part of housing, real will on the part of developers. It takes a team for this to happen. It can't happen in a void. And one of the big changes that made Manhattan Plaza possible is zoning changes, frankly. That's what really, that cleaned up 42nd Street, so to speak, changed 42nd Street, was that the zoning laws changed.
Okay, we're starting to get some questions in from the audience. So this first one's actually a comment, a special comment from Nicole. I was born and still live in Manhattan Plaza as a third generation artist. This is my first time watching it, and it's so wonderful.
Well, thank you, Nicole. Yay, good. keep being the pioneer that you are.
So Sharon says, wonderful documentary, brings back memories of that era in the late 70s. Very inspiring to see this and the few other projects like AHO and Providence as examples of how this model can be successful.
Thank you. I'm glad you got it. I mean, just to kind of carry on our discussion about where this is going to happen, how it's going to happen. I feel that every building, every place that has affordable housing for artists has to be organic to the place and to the time. And that's what we're going to see, is very creative approaches to how to get this kind of housing available to people.
So Alice, you started making this film around 14 years ago. Did you, and that's been a very dynamic time for New York in 14 years. With respect to that part of the city or Manhattan in general, sometimes people say that New York has forgotten the artist and it's been a challenging place for artists to establish a residence and to create like they did decades ago with Manhattan Plaza and Soho, as you discussed in the film. I bet I bet when you premiered the film 3 years ago, you didn't fully understand. You may not have seen how relevant the film had become just 3 years later.
Well, actually, we had a very interesting summit at the Ford Foundation, and the people who were there were housing experts in New York City, and I was trying to find a way to work with them and have them use the film for lobbying, for political work, whatever people wanted to use it for. And one of the things that came up is they said, you know, we're in a housing crisis. And I said, when I started the film, I didn't know that. And there's literally a housing crisis. You know, that we talked a little bit about homelessness and about the enormous problems facing our infrastructure in terms of creating new housing that will be sufficient. And so my answer to you is no, I didn't know. It was fortuitous that this was a very passionate idea for me, having been a young actress myself. And I actually turned down an apartment at Manhattan Plaza because I was afraid of walking over there. I said, oh, I come home late at night by myself. I'm not going to be able to live there.
Wow, what decade was that?
That was in the 70s.
Wow, yeah. It was rough, pretty rough. So we have a couple of questions along the lines of the following. What happens to the actors who are living there as they age and they retire? There was a reference to actors being asked about their incomes as they live there, but will they be exempt from having to answer that since they have no more income in their older age? And can they still live there? And what happens to their families when the creatives pass?
So these are all really good questions. We're kind of getting into the weeds here a little bit, but one of the important things about Manhattan Plaza is that it's what's referred to in housing terms as a NORC, which is a naturally occurring retirement community, that all these young people moved in and then they never left because it's so hard to find other housing. And so because Manhattan Plaza is now designated as a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community, the Actors Fund has actually taken over the services that are offered at the Rodney Kirk Center, and people are encouraged to age in place in their apartments. And again, their rent becomes adjusted. And just as Larry David was paying, I think, $56 a month, if you're not earning, your rent drops accordingly. And so there are protections for older people. As far as families go, I know that it used to be that if you were divorced, each member of the family would, you know, the husband or the wife would each get an apartment. I think they had to stop that. And they don't do that anymore, but the joke is that when your child is born at Manhattan Plaza, you put them on the waiting list for an apartment. But of course, they would have to qualify as an artist, and they wouldn't just get an apartment.
Okay. Here's a question from Lindsay Drew. Love the documentary. My acting teacher, Marsha Haufrecht, still lives in Manhattan Plaza and has for years. It has a special feeling there that you really captured. Curious what you think we can do as artists to support another miracle like this one.
Well, I think there's quite a few things you can do, but the most important thing is that artists stay engaged in their community, that you be politically active, that you vote, that you take time to know your very, very local representatives, and that you, if you're truly interested in housing, the Actors Fund, for example, creates affordable housing for artists and works extremely hard to do that. So there are lots of allies, and you can see that this Manhattan Plaza started because there were a group of actors, and through the unions, they were organizing to create housing, and they were ready.
Rob Rinderman asks, Alice, fantastic film. What do you envision for future return of Broadway theaters?
I think that we're going to have the most exciting Broadway season ever in the fall. And I think people are so eager to get back to the theater and to have live entertainment. I think it's like it's not even like having your dessert taken away. It's like having the main course taken away. And a lot of us can just feel it in our gut, that emptiness.
Marjorie asks, are the artists still paying according to income? I saw in the film the building was bought by Related and the new rents would be over $1 million. Is that really the case? Or I know it's mixed, they blend the residents there, but $1 million?
So, okay, again, at the risk of having everybody's eyes roll back in their heads, that housing, the affordable housing is, there are three kinds of housing at Manhattan Plaza. There's the Section 8, there's the Mitchell-Lama, which is middle income, and then there is the, what they call the fair market. However, even the fair market is subsidized at Manhattan Plaza. So there are no $1 million rents in Manhattan Plaza, that everything is a portion of an income. So even if you're in the unsubsidized part, there is a cap to your income, that you have to have an income below a certain level because the entire building is subsidized housing. And yeah, the amount you pay is always based on what's called the area mean income, the AMI. And I can, if you want to email me on the side, I can tell you more. It's quite detailed, but it's a very fair system, and it's still very fair. It's that's how the building was set up. And Related, much to their credit, they have a whole affordable housing division, and this is part of that division, and they absolutely support this.
Jeff asks, the building recently denied a gay bar on 10th Avenue. Does not this mean the building has lost its creative edge and is nothing more than a low-cost housing at this point?
Well, when you say the building, that doesn't mean the residents. And by the way, all of the tenants at Manhattan Plaza are always called residents, that was a choice that was made early on instead of tenants. So when you say the building, that doesn't mean that the people who live there made any decision about that the tenants, the business tenants in the building are chosen by Related and for different reasons. And I was never involved in knowing any of their choices. We do know that they were very supportive, for example, to the Little Pie Company, that they found a way to make them have a place there. The thing that is very concerning to me and everyone is that the West Bank, the great traditional restaurant that's been there since the building opened, is on hard times right now, as are most restaurants. And so I think there's quite a bit being done to save that restaurant and to try to keep it in its, it's just a landmark institution on 42nd Street.
Sure, I saw an article about that in the Times not that long ago. A similar topic, great documentary, curious as to why so little time was devoted to the gay men who lived in the building and the minimal time given to the AIDS crisis.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. We were highly criticized for giving so much time to the AIDS crisis. It's quite a big section in the film, actually. I'm surprised you don't think it's adequate. But I think that I personally lost many friends, and I wanted to be sure that we took the time to honor them.
Okay. Another attendee asks, I never heard a connection made between the historical and unfair stigma against Section 8 housing and the Section 8 discharge categorization. That was an interesting observation, and that was an interesting observation and could explain some folks' unfair and unjust views.
I think it's more from just, there are two kinds of Section 8 housing. One is the voucher-based and one is the project-based. And project-based means that a building is designated as Section 8 housing. And in this case, Manhattan Plaza was one of the very last buildings to be designated as Section 8 housing, because they found that having a voucher, they felt, in theory, was going to be more fair, that you wouldn't be stigmatized by going, oh, that building is just full of, low-paying tenants. That you supposedly could take a Section 8 voucher and move anywhere. Well, of course, that hasn't proved true, but, it's not true at all. But that was the idea, was to take away the stigma of the Section 8.
So Alice, I want to ask you a few questions about the filmmaking. What brought you to this project in the first place? What's the genesis of The Miracle on 42nd Street?
Okay, it's going to sound like I'm setting up a joke. Two casting directors were having lunch at the commissary, and they were talking about how much they loved living at Manhattan Plaza. It was Mary Jo Slater and Nancy Perkins. And a friend came up to them and heard their conversation and said those fatal words, "Oh, you should make a documentary." And they looked at each other and they said, "Yeah, we should." And they were both just terrific producers. They raised money and they invited me to direct. And I decided to do it because I remembered growing up, in some ways getting the message that artists were kind of parasites on society, that artists weren't really important and artists were a drain. And I learned that that's actually not true at all, that we generate millions and millions of dollars. In New York City, wherever we go, we create restaurants, we create nightlife, we create safe streets. Our artists tend to get involved politically, we tend to be good citizens, and we tend to be very stable for communities. So I wanted to tell that story. That was just a real passion of mine, to show the value of artists in our communities.
Did making the film educate you? Did it clarify matters for you? Did it confirm your assumptions in starting out? How did you grow in making this film in terms of your understanding and awareness of artists and their contribution to communities?
Yes, because I was put in touch with so many people who are passionate about housing and about the fundamental right to have safe, affordable housing. It is a fundamental, it should be in the Constitution, that everybody has a right to safe, affordable housing. And so I learned that in this film, that it's, and there are, people like the people in art that have the art space. There are commissioners in small and large towns all across this country who are passionate about bringing artists into their downtown areas and letting them do their work.
So some directors are comfortable talking about budgets and others less comfortable. Which side of the fence are you on?
I'm going to split it with you. I'm going to tell you that we had a fairly good budget for this, but we ran out of money. And as you can see, there's a lot of archival footage in this, and archival footage has gotten very expensive. And we were touch and go whether we were actually going to be able to do anything more with the film than have it at one film festival. Because every photograph, every piece of footage, we had to find who owned it and pay for it. And it was, so honestly, I'll tell you honestly that this film has a 10-year life, and then that was all we could afford to license.
Oh, the limited licenses.
Yeah.
So, oh, what that's I think that might be a topic for another documentary, because if this film disappears from audiences, then we no longer have the dialogue. Then we lose the lesson, and that there's something very wrong about that too. But we'll save that one for another day. What advice can you give to filmmakers who are here tonight about going out and raising money for a film that has an important message? It's a narrow film in some respects. It's about a housing development, but it's a much bigger film too. How do filmmakers, what things should they be thinking about in financing projects like that may not have the broadest appeal, and how do they go about doing that?
Well, I think you just said it very clearly, Stephen, that the idea of, well, what is the bigger theme? What is this an example of that resonates not only nationally, but internationally? And so this film has had an incredible life at the Architecture and Design Festival. And it's played in Rotterdam, in Vienna, in, I'm sorry, I can't remember the third place, but it's had quite a run in, Toronto. So it's had quite a run internationally, which I never expected. And people who really are thinking around the world about what are we going to do about housing, because there is a housing crisis internationally. And it was there, that really, we were screened at the UN as part of their homeless and housing conference. And so I would encourage people to not only think about your story, but then what are the resonances? How does this story echo, and look for the people who can represent that as well.
So here's a nice comment. Darlene says, I disagree with the comment on the gay community in the Manhattan Project. I thought it was portrayed beautifully. So thank you, Darlene. Amy.
And also, one of my dreams in making the film is there were a lot of people we interviewed that we weren't able to put in the film eventually. And one of my dreams had always been, if we could raise enough money, was to have a website where these stories would be available. And I remember there's one guy who was a male dancer in the theaters, which are now Theater Row. He was a male dancer, and then he later went and became a minister, and was and he had this incredible journey in his life. And I just loved his story so much, and there just wasn't room for it in the film.
So here's a question from Amy. With Hudson Yards, the new target, and other new developments, I think things seem to be scaling up for something new in Hell's Kitchen. Based on your long study of that area, what does Hell's Kitchen look like in 5 or 10 years?
Well, if you look at the map of Manhattan, that's an area that is so ripe for development, because it is walkable to the theaters, it's walkable to Midtown. It just was an area that was not very desirable for a long time, and suddenly we've awakened to its value. And I think it's going to be, and I think it's one of the areas that's actually pinpointed for development.
Okay. Seems like there are a lot of success stories that come out of Manhattan Plaza. Um, are there any calculations or is there anything apart from an archive or anything apart from your film that accumulates these stories and that sort of honors the success rate of the residents?
I don't think so, and that's really sad. When Richard Hunnings ran the building, he was sort of a mental archive of everyone who'd lived there and all the successes they'd had. And there actually should be an archivist for Manhattan Plaza that collects this information and even oral histories of people who lived there. It's a real treasure trove. I mean, we just scratched the surface. I mean, we didn't get Marge Champion, we didn't get Marin Alsop. I mean, there were just so many people that we didn't have in the film. It breaks my heart, honestly, because great, important people, you know, that I just couldn't, Mary Alice, you know, just wonderful performers that we couldn't shoehorn into this film.
It almost feels like there should be a Hall of Fame or some sort of shouldn't be a contest, but the whole spirit of the arts community. You'd think that it would be honored so that others can come and discover and learn from it, and then take it back to their communities.
Yeah, almost kind of an online archive, I would think, that might be run, and maybe even through the union, you know, that or the unions, SAG-AFTRA and Equity, to put together this. And it could be in the form of advice, you know, to young performers. It could be in the form of, you know, memory of the type of theater, type of work that was done. But I think there are lots of opportunities. I'd be so glad to contribute our footage to it. I mean, we have, as I said, so many wonderful interviews and longer interviews of the people that yeah.
Well, so I mean, the film is chock-a-block with stars. I mean, how did you secure them? How did you lure them onto camera? Some of these people are very busy. What was it like?
I gave you a big clue, Stephen, when I said how the film was started. Two casting directors got together and had lunch. Okay, so we had two of these incredibly powerful women who, in Hollywood, who, you know, they were owed favors, and they called them in. And what was wonderful, though, was every single person that we asked said yes, because the building had meant so much to them. Mm. So we had, just make it happen and I'll do it. Yeah.
So does the building still have community talent shows where featuring the residents, the kind of activities that Larry David and Ken Kramer participated in?
I don't think they have that exact activity, but they do have some of the things that we featured in the film. And they have like the clothing exchange. They have that twice a year. They have the traditional holiday celebrations. And I think that anyone in the building can use the Ellington room for an activity or create a group. There are also planned activities where too. The seniors have get-togethers, they have activities. So, and it's, believe me, when we wanted that room, we had to sign up a couple months in advance to give a free screening to the tenants, and we had to do 2 of them. So, yeah, that was, I think it's important that places remain fluid, that you can do change, that there's flexibility, as long as the same spirit endures.
So Ezra asked, how did you know that all these people were from Manhattan Plaza? I guess, I know that you had the casting agents, which helped you outreach and secure the interviews. But how did you even know that they were from there?
both of the casting directors had lived in the building.
Oh, okay.
So they, they were tuned in to this. They knew. Yeah. And everybody says, oh, did you talk to so-and-so and so-and-so? Yeah. Everyone was so helpful and generous.
David says, think how successful and well-known the draw of the Hollywood Walk of Fame is and the stars of the sidewalk. What if?
Yeah, it's a great idea. Talk to related, they may, I think that it would be a fun thing to do. Yeah, it's a great idea.
Carol Holland Lifshitz says, great job, Alice. I saw my brother, Mark Holland, in the film.
Mark was such a supporter. Oh, I'm so glad to tell you how great your brother is. That he wanted to get me connected to Harvard and go up there and speak. And it didn't work out, but it was he spent a lot of time on calling up his contacts and trying to help us. He was an ideal subject.
So David Wilder asks a good question. Did the acting unions play any kind of significant role in originally targeting this housing towards actors?
Absolutely, yes. The unions had the housing committees already in place. And so they were able to, there was someone that they could go to, these committees, and say, what do you think of this? And so, yes, it was critical that they were already in the works. The idea was there.
Okay, here's a comment and question. Great film and great discussion. Thank you. You said that the zoning changed, which allowed for the experiment to happen. In what way did the zoning change?
That they were allowed to build higher buildings on 42nd Street, and they were allowed to build over theaters. And that hadn't been allowed before. And they were allowed to take some of the landmark buildings and repurpose them.
So again, a filmmaking question. Alice, what are you working on these days? Are you involved in a project? And if so, how is COVID impacting your development or production of that project?
That I'm head of the documentary area at NYU. And so we've been wrestling with this since last March, how to continue with production. I was able to teach 2 documentary production courses in the fall. And I'm teaching students a lot about archival footage, how to use archival footage, how to use stock footage, that we have very strict filming protocols right now, but the documentaries have been able to go ahead because we have a little bit more flexibility than the films that are on a set and closed in. For my own work, I'm trying to use this time to figure out what to do next. I have a film that's being edited right now, so I was in a good position to not be in production. But I have an idea for a film I want to do in the summer, and yeah, hopefully we'll be back.
Okay, this is the last question. That's wonderful. We look forward to seeing the work that's in post. Can we ask you about the topic of that, or is that under wraps?
No, it's not under wraps. It's a short film, and it's about a small town band in the Catskills. It's called the Callicoon Center Band, and it plays every Wednesday night, rain or shine, for 10 weeks in the summer. And every time I hear them start to play, I start to cry. Oh. It just touches me. And I thought, oh, well, this is a message to my heart that I've got to make this little film. And so I just grew up in this very small town, and I love the people there. I love the tradition, and I love the music.
Oh, wow. Where do they play in that center where where there's some old shops, and then there's the hotel on the other side in Callicoon? Where do they play?
That's Callicoon. This is Callicoon Center, which when the train used to go from Callicoon to Roscoe, in the middle it had to stop and get fuel and water. So they called it Callicoon Center. And okay. Callicoon Center is much smaller than Callicoon. And so that's where the band plays. But come and see it. You can just Google the Callicoon Center Band.
So I hope this doesn't embarrass you when I mentioned to the audience that you were a very successful actress before you were a filmmaker, and I wonder if you ever have that acting itch. I know you relate to the actors so beautifully in the film. So do you ever have that acting itch, and would you ever consider acting again?
I don't know. I love actors and I so respect the people that do it and the people that love it. And, all the time growing up as an actor, they said, if you ever find anything else you can do it. And I found something else that I can do and that is so fulfilling to me. And it lets me be near actors. And so I love the proximity because I so respect and cherish what they do.
Well, you certainly do documentaries very, very well, and filmmaking so well too. What a rare and special talent, and what a treat it has been to share the film, to watch the film. It's been an honor for me to co-host in tonight's event and to ask you these questions. We grateful for the evening. We learned a lot, and wish you great success going forward. And Rivka, any closing remarks?
Thank you so much, Alice. And for everyone who's watching, we will be following up again with information. I know that Amazon has the film available to rent and buy. And so we'll follow up with a link for that, a link to our Still New York website. And as Dan mentioned, we will be asking for people to fill out surveys because we're trying to gather information on artist housing in New York City as well. So if you all would participate in that, that would be wonderful. And thanks for everyone for coming. This was a great evening.
Alice, you're an inspiration. Have a good night. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you. It's been an honor, and for this foundation too. I'm so happy that you chose this film.